So this is modified programming. Mary is going to right now, she's behind me, the lovely Mary, and she's going to share a folder with you guys, a shared drive that will have all of the materials that you'll need for this presentation and then moving forward with your kiddos. So I want to just talk about these 5 problems that I've seen throughout the years, especially when I was in student services, that are just focused on modified programming. Here we go. So here is the number one problem that we have, and it's this blurred role that we have between EAs and teachers. And I want you guys to know that there's no blame here. It's just something that we need to be aware of and how we can move forward and support our EAs and our teachers better so that we have clear roles. So the issues that we have right now is that often the EAs, rather than the teachers, are responsible for the development of a student's program that's on a modified programming. So often there might be a box that we're using for that, a program out of a box, but they end up being responsible for developing it. And that really needs to be the teacher. They're often responsible also for the instructional cycle with regards to the program. And then that one-to-one support that we often have, we see the impact of that on student independence and peer relationships, which we're going to talk about. So here's the first one. I'm calling this the high 5. So this is number 1. Number 2 is this lack of consistency with programming. So when I was going to build this little presentation, I looked back as a student services coordinator, and I'm like, I wonder how many modified programs I made when I was in student services. And I am not even kidding you. When I opened up my drive, I had easily like 300, 400 individual student modified programs. And so I can just imagine you guys as LST, you probably would have the same thing where you're making all kinds of little modified. I'm making this one for Jackie. Now I'm making this one for Amy. Now I got to make this one for Alex. And it's very, very time consuming and it takes a lot of work. So it takes time from you being able to work with kids because you're making the programs yourself. So we often then refer to box programs. So we're looking for a box program. And we know a lot of times those don't meet the needs of our kids, but we're desperate. So we go and find a box program, or we go to teachers pay teachers, which often isn't what we want. But again, I think we're just in survival mode. So we have hundreds of these individual programs and there's no consistency. So if you think about that, I see Jackie, lovely Jackie. Hi, Jackie. So Jackie's made something amazing for her students in HJ. And now in the middle of the year, they're moving over and they're going to Old High. And there's no consistency there because now Old High is going to make something different, or what Old High is doing is different than Jackie. And so then the parents are like, where's the consistency around that? And here's the big one. And I think this is huge for us. We have had no scope and sequence for programming. So we don't actually have a curriculum in front of us that says, this is what we would like these students to know by the time they leave us in grade 12. And if we don't have that, then we also have no way of tracking what they're learning. And so when they get to grade 12, we have lots of parents that are like, they need to come back again. We want them in grade 13 and grade 14. And then we have no way of saying, actually, no, this is the curriculum we're teaching, and we have completed this curriculum. And we've been monitoring and showing their progress across. So then there's this misunderstanding between the purpose of an IPP and the curriculum. A lot of times right now, we've been using our IPP as our learning tool to mark progress. So that is a big one. Here's the next one. We then also had no clear assessment and reporting process. So not only did we not have those really clear outcomes that we could use with these students, but we had no way of clearly assessing them and where they're at on those outcomes. And then we had no progress report. And if we did, then we would have made one within our school because student service didn't provide you with one. So these are not your problems, these are our problems, right? This is student services and us being able to solve these problems. So Tracy might have a modified program in Fox Run that she's using, and Carolyn Massel down in West Glen has a totally different one. And so that doesn't make sense to us. We should have the same progress report across all of our schools and the same outcomes that we're measuring. So if you think about that in any other class, Alex in chemistry, I see Alex, so she knows, she's got her chemistry outcomes and she's measuring those. And if you went to Olds High, they'd have the same chemistry outcomes. So this has just kind of been the mystery of where we don't know what are those outcomes and how are we measuring them and how are we reporting on them. So there was another problem that we're trying to solve. And the fourth one is no clear aligned transition plan to adulthood. So this has really been, I'd say it has come up more and more with the change in the Education Act. But if, our parents come to us, and Jackie and I have been through this now, and they say, listen, I want my child to come back again for year 13. And I know in Didsbury High, we have the same thing. Jackie, right now, we haven't armed her with a really strong way to say, first of all, here's the curriculum, and this is what I've been doing for the past 3 years, and this is where your child's at. And we don't have a clear pathway plan that says, this is what the transition to adulthood looks like. And we started this all the way back in grade 8 and grade 9. So everybody's on the same page. And by the time we get to grade 12, there's no question about what's going to happen in grade 12. Right now, I feel like they've got us. We're kind of stuck because we don't have that clear pathway plan. And so when they come to us and say, well, I want them to come back again for another year, Jackie isn't even able to say, well, wait, remember, this is the curriculum. And remember, this is the plan. We don't have those things. So we definitely needed to make a pathway plan. So I know you guys today will have seen that Sharon in one of the sessions is going through in detail the Chinook's Edge pathway plan. If you're in high school, you must go to that. Like, that is going to be a lifesaver for you. Dean Nielsen is your go-to person to help you with those plans. So we're not asking you to go out on your own and have those conversations. Dean, as part of alternative programming, will help you with the plans and with the conversations with the parents. Okay, and then the final one is something I think we're doing really well as a school division, but it's something that I call moving from experience distant to experience near. So previously, if you had a modified student, you would have had probably quite a few external consultants coming in. So you would have had an external, maybe psychologist do an assessment. You would have had external OT, SLP, often not from the division, but from Alberta Health that were coming in. And so that was really hard because they were working at different hours. They were working on different visions and missions and mandates. And it wasn't easy to bring all of them together. And when you have an organization that experienced distant, all of that expertise and specialized knowledge lies outside of your organization. So, I think of Yun, amazing. I have no idea how we managed to hire him. And he is now part of Chinook's Edge, but what a blessing for us. But before, when he was outside of our organization, all of his knowledge, all of his skills, all of his expertise was outside and was not easy for us to build and develop within our own organization. So you can see us moving to this experience near model where we're hiring OTs, hiring our own SLPs, hiring psychologists that do our assessments for us rather than consulting, and then hiring our rehab and therapy assistants so they're ours and that they can support our teams with what we need. So it's really important as we move forward that I think anytime we need that kind of experience, the more we can hire that within our organization, I think the better it is. Like, I think of right now the YES program that we have moving across the division, huge for helping our students with mental health. And that also would have been an external group because it was through mental health. Okay, are you ready? Here's your 5 problems. Are you thinking, that's great, Marcy? These are all 5 problems that I'm living with every day. Now I want some solutions. So you ready for the solutions? Okay, so I'm going to walk you through what I'm calling the modified instructional cycle. So the first thing is I want to talk about our EAs. I did do this presentation in bits with our EAs last year in January, but I think all of our EAs need to know this. So like on the 24th, when I'm doing so, I'm going to hit it again because it's so important that our EAs understand their roles and their responsibilities, particularly in this area. So on the 24th, we're going to talk about what it means to be part of a team as an EA. But right now, I'm really focusing on what it means to be an EA with a lower cognitive student that's on a modified program. So with those EAs, I gave them research because I think it's important sometimes for us to move to the evidence in the research. I don't want to just be talking off the cuff and saying, like, here's some things I think. No, this is something that the research has told us in multiple areas. So not just one article, but multiple articles. So like a meta-analysis of the impact of EAs on our students. And so I gave each of the EAs one of these articles for them to read before they had the presentation. And these slides are going to be in that drive that Mary has shared with you. So all of the articles are in the drive. But here's the first one. The first finding is that students can and often do form what we call a codependent relationship with their EA. And so what that means is that they end up asking the EA to do many things that we would like them to be able to do independently. And so if our whole goal in modified programming is to build independence, you can see how this is going to be tricky if we have such a codependent relationship that is impacting their ability to build that independence with our kids. And so here's the recommended practices, right? If our goal is to build independence, then whenever we can, we model that independence for our students. And we model that ability for them to be independent within the classroom. So more about pushing in than pulling out, finding opportunities where you can model the activity with the students together rather than you doing it for them is really important. The second finding, which I was surprised at. I think when I read it, I'm like, that makes sense, but I never really thought about it this way. And it's about how our EAs can impact our students' peer interactions. So, if you're an EA and you're with a student, especially in high school, and you're around that student for most of the day, the research would say that that student's interactions with their peers is significantly impacted by that. And I can see that. You think about it, like a lot of times they just want to hang out with their peers. And when we get into high school and junior high, they see an adult and they're like, well, we're not going to go and hang out with Tracy because her EA is with her. And we're like, that's not cool. We don't want to do that. And so we end up isolating our kids with that. So it's really talking to our EAs about finding those moments when they can remove themselves so that they can create opportunities for our kids to have authentic peer interactions, and connecting our EAs with more than one student so our students don't have ownership over an EA. Like I remember going into a school and this student was in grade 2, but he's like, and this is my EA. Like he introduced them, like, and this is Mary Smith, my EA. And I'm like, ooh, okay, like, we got a little problem there. It's like, this is my person and nobody else can have this person. So it's that idea of making sure that we tie our EAs to more than one student, particularly over time. Because if you have the same EA year after year after year, imagine the relationship, the codependence that you're building there. And then also teaching our EAs how to situate themselves so they don't always have to be right near the student. They could be within the classroom and moving over when they need support and helping other students at the same time. Fading support in and out throughout the day so they're not with them for the whole day, all day, every day. Again, that pushing in rather than pulling out and just creating those authentic opportunities that I talked about. So I put a couple of articles into the drive for you. I really love this article. It really talks about the issues and provides solutions. So it's a good read for your EAs. And I also wanted to share this evidence from our division. So when you look at this, these are 2 schools within our division. So Chinook's Edge data. And what you see there is our occupational health and safety reports when a staff member has been injured by a student. So this isn't like, hey, I slipped and fell on the ice and I filled out an OH&S. This is, I have been significantly harmed by a student, and that has warranted me filling out a report. And so you can see over the years, we saw something happening, which was an increase in these reports because we're seeing an increase in our complexities of our students. And our students are becoming more complex. I don't need to tell you guys that. But a school that is practicing a team approach when they're meeting the needs of their students, look what's happening to the safety of their staff. So I look at School A, and these are very similar schools, very similar number of students, similar profiles. And we've got School A that decided to work with kite teams, and they went from 48, then they were at 62, now bam, they're at 14, then they moved down to 5. Last year they had none. Like it was 0, because I think their teams are really functioning at a high level. School B that is still looking at that one-to-one model, look what's happening to them. So they went from 51 to 63 to 72, then they were at 92, and last year they were at 123. Like that is a lot. So if there's no other compelling data that I can put before you to reconsider how you are using your EAs, I think this is probably the most compelling I can come up with, which is our people are getting hurt by the model that we were using before. And we need to think differently about how we're going to use our EAs. I would love to come out anytime and talk to you about kite teams and help you with it. Coordinators can as well. It is one of my favorite things, though, is to look at like EAs, students, and come up with different ways to use our EAs purposefully and safely. All right, we're going to keep going. Here is just a quick little document that I made that you can provide teachers and EAs, which is here's the role of the teachers in the different areas in the modified instructional cycle, and here's the role of the EAs. So programming is teachers. The EAs don't have a role in programming, but planning, they definitely do. So the teachers might plan out how we're going to deliver the outcome, but the EA is the one that's collecting, collating, creating those plans, creating the resources, doing the laminating sometimes that we need, the Velcroing that sometimes happens. And they also can be together to discuss what those materials will look like. So they can do that together. Assessing. So, you know, I understand as a teacher, you can't be there all the time to assess the outcomes. The EAs are often the ones that watch that. And so we've created something that's called a monitoring assessment tool for our EAs, where they can look at what the student is doing and then come to the teacher and say, we're ready, like come over and have a look at this and assess it. So I'll show you that. Supervising, of course, the teachers are the ones that supervise the classroom management, but the EAs can support the teacher with that classroom management. And they can support the kite plans that the teachers develop as part of a team. So they support those. And teaching as well. The teachers, of course, can help with the outcomes, but we know our EAs are the ones that often are the ones that teach and support the delivery of the outcome. And that's fine. I think the biggest place where we need to shift is the development of the program and the assessment of the program. That's where our teachers really need to be in. There should be no reason why a student in our division does not have access to a teacher for their program and a teacher to assess that program. And then I just did a list of our best practices, so you've got them. All right, here we go, folks. Modified instructional cycle coming your way. The first thing I want to make sure we've got a caution on is that I think anytime we're talking about these students, it's a guided conversation. The LST, the principals, the parents, the teacher, when you're getting ready to set up one of these programs, you need to share the ownership of it. The parents need to be part of it. Definitely the principal and the vice principal need to be there. And the LST is there, and so is the teacher. If the teacher's not there, then guess who becomes the teacher? The LST. So then all of a sudden you're running all of these programs, you're delivering all of the programs, and you're assessing all the programs. So it's really important that the teacher is alongside you. The other big one that I just put in bold is really understanding the difference between a learning disability and a lower cognitive functioning student. So our LD students sometimes look like they're lower cognitively, but they're not. Remember, they can do the same thing. They have the same, they're academically average to high IQ, but they need accommodations. And this would be a serious error. If we ended up moving an LD student into a modified program, that's huge. Because what we're talking about with these students is often they're not getting a diploma, right? They're looking at something different. So I really caution you to make sure that you've made sure you've stricken out, it's not an LD student that we're talking about, right? Sometimes it's a double whammy, which I just think, oh, those are the muffins that really break my heart, is when they have a severe LD and they're also lower cognitive. Like, that's brutal, right? Because then they also need these huge accommodations, plus they have a lower cognitive ability. And so those students might actually be in this modified program. And then just, again, understanding the long-term implications. It might not be that I'm fully on a modified program. Maybe I just have a block of life skills and I'm working in K&E, or I have some -2 things and I have some life skills that I need. And then defining the roles so that the LST isn't all roles and the EA isn't all roles. It's a sharing across of who is doing what. Everybody in this process has a really important role. The principal has an important role as the administrator at being the person that supports the program. So like Alex with Jackie, Alex's job is to support Jackie and her team with the program. So making sure the parents are in and connected. And then Jackie is there to support the teachers and the EAs with the program. But poor little Miss Jackie isn't like running all the programs. That would be just, that's too much, right? It's too much. Okay. So here's the process from tip to tail. The goal always, and remember this because it's important for assessment. We're not assessing these students on completion. We're not giving them percentages. We're giving them where they sit on a continuum of independence. So for every single outcome in our TEP, which is our high school curriculum, or a K-8 life skills curriculum, you are assessing the student on their ability to be independent. And that independence is defined by their individual ability and capacity, not how I define independence. Like, you have to be able to do that on your own without any support at all. That's independent. That might not be a reality for a student. So it's what we've defined as independent for that student. And then we're measuring that. And that's how we're assessing them and moving through the curriculum. So it's a very different way of assessing an outcome than completion, and a mark of excellent or proficient. So in your drive, you'll see some documents to help support you with this. You'll see the life skills curriculum K-8. You'll see the TEP curriculum 9 to 12. You'll see a life skills curriculum mapping guide that we made for K-8. Mary and I are going to make the 9 to 12. And then you'll see what I talked about, which is your skill independence continuum, so you can measure where a student is at. And the first thing you're going to do is you're going to sit down with your teacher, your EA, and you're going to look at your profile. So I've got Ben here who's in grade 10, and I've got his academic achievement of where he's at. So I'm like, oh, he's sitting in kindergarten, literacy and numeracy. He has some strengths that I've talked about here, an interest, loves dinosaurs, likes music and coloring, stretches, like he needs to really work on his peer interactions and regulation of his emotions. And then his profile. He's autism diagnosis, lots of sensory concerns, needs visuals. Like, I haven't met a modified student that doesn't need visuals. There's some social emotional concerns, some behavior issues. Like, this this kid is fast. When he's bolting, it's hard for any of us to grab him. And he requires a modified program. And we decided as a team throughout the day he needs that. And so we decided, given that he is working at such a low level, we're looking at the K-8 life skills curriculum rather than the TEP. So in high school, you guys have two things you need to be able to do. And the first one is you've got to decide which curriculum are you sitting on. And you might even be between two. So you might be looking at literacy and numeracy in this curriculum, and then communication and functional health skills are in the TEP. So which curriculum are you going to be on is the first one. So, and then you're looking at the outcomes. So what I did with this team is walk them through, okay, let's look at the curriculum. Let's pick some areas that we're going to focus on, and let's use this continuum of independence to determine where the area of focus is. So what things can they do independently based on how we define that independence for the student, and what things do we need to start to develop and build? So I gave a sample here. So I'm looking at Ben, and we went right away to the TP curriculum because he's in grade 10. And the first thing under there, under number sense in numeracy, is count by ones from 0 to 100. And we're like, whoa, no, like, no, he can't do that. So like, now what? Like, do we scaffold that in this outcome? And I'm like, no, we're moving. We moved to the K-8 curriculum, and we looked at where he was on this. It was so much easier for us. So we took out the highlighters, we lined them up back with this rubric, right? So green is that they can do it independently. Your fall colors, your yellow and your orange, are the ones where you're focusing. So you can see here, we're like at level 3, he's really focusing and needing help on identifying and sorting and classifying objects. That's where we're going to go first. We're going to look at that and see if we can build that, and then move into level 4 from there. And then we did our literacy skills, and we used this curriculum mapping guide. So what would happen is you would literally just be like a teacher would. You're going through your outcomes, and you're seeing which ones they can do, which ones they can't do. And you're making a map of the things that you are going to be working on with this student throughout the year. Because you don't need to teach them the whole curriculum. Like, that's what's tricky about these modified kids, is they're like a scatter plot. In some areas, they're really successful. In other areas, they need lots of support. And so my intention when I built this for you guys was to give you a roadmap. So you actually have a curriculum in front of you, and you can make a learning profile for your students. And be like, okay, here are the things that we need to be able to teach these students in reading, in literacy, in functional skills. And then once you have that, you move forward and you make what we call a work system. So any questions so far with the curriculum mapping guide? Is this all making sense? Okay, I'm seeing Amy nodding. That's a good sign. Jackie is giving me a good nod. Okay, I haven't lost anybody yet. Yes, Kylie, I do. I recommend one goal in each of the areas. So literacy, one goal that I'm working on. Numeracy, one goal that I'm working on, right? For each of those reporting periods, and then moving through. Because if you have 5 numeracy goals and 5 literacy goals, overwhelming. So I would focus on one goal and then moving to the next one and moving to the next one. So when you get to your progress report, what you might show is, here's the goal we're working on, and here's where they're at, and these are the ones that are coming up next. So for example, Jackie, you might have a progress report at the end for Ty that shows 3 goals that you've been working on, because he's completed 1 in literacy, and now you've moved on to the second one, and he's got that, and the third one is in progress. That's the one that he's working on right now. And so Ty's mom's going to see, oh, independent at this, working on this. Right. So this is just an example to show you, as I went through, to map out Ben. So we just went through all of them to see where he was at. And you can see the ones that he needs support on. So in this 3 area, we did 3A as a big one that we're going to focus on. And the rest of these we put on because we want him to get to independent. He's so close, right? Look at all the blues. We're like, we could totally work on those and get those to be independent. And the stretch goal that we're working on is 3A. Okay, so once you have all of those, you've got all of your outcomes, you've got that mapped out, you know where your student's at. The next thing that you're going to be doing is making a work system. And so a couple of ways that you could do that is look at your curriculum itself, pick the outcome, put that into the work system. Or you could use what they call an instructional matrix. So I asked Giselle, because she was sort of just amazing with these work systems. What are the things I need to know when I'm making a work system? So you're making this independent student system. And remember, it's independent for a reason, which means the student should be able to have moments throughout the day of independence where they're looking at the work system, going through the tasks, and achieving the independence along the way. So it's got to be visual, that's for sure. The learning outcomes are the focus, not the strategy, right? So if it's counting to 25, that's the outcome that I'm working on. And then the task underneath has the outcome, and there might be a strategy that they're using to do that. We want them to be able to be independent with the task. So scaffold and build the task as you go along. And then the assessment of that outcome needs to be done by the teacher, right? So it has to be assessed by the teacher along the way. So here's the instructional matrix that I did for Ben that I just think is helpful. So as you're going through, it's like, what's his day look like? And when are we doing each of these tasks? So he's coming into the school. He's got some regulation time. And then boom, we're into numeracy. So I can see for this student, I made a binder and I'm like, okay, here's your OT tasks that you're doing. And now we're in numeracy. So flip over to numeracy. Here's the task you're working on. And then after that, we had a social skills break. So he went and worked on some social language and with his peers. Then he came back and now he's in literacy. And so when he went back to his work system, literacy would be the next thing that he's working on. And then he was back in the sensory room, just sort of to give himself a break. And that was his day 1. Day 2, I moved it over, and that would be more of him looking at now communication and some functional life skills would be the next one. So if you want to use a matrix, the template's in there for you to help you with that. I think all of these students need to have a visual schedule. Like, yeah, you gotta have that. If you don't have that, then they're freaking out. What's coming up next? They need to know what the day looks like. You know, if they need to rip that off during the day so they've got it, if they just have it in front of them so they know where they're going, if there's a change in the schedule, it's easy for you to put that in and say, remember, today is the day we have an assembly. So we put that in your schedule so that when it comes, it's not a surprise. So a visual schedule for these students is a must. And then you think about when you're going to do the independent student system. So you saw I had this student have some learning time, 2 blocks, the rest of the time is regulation. Some of you might have, they're in school in classes, and then they come out for a block of this. So maybe the rest of the time they're in with their math students, they're in a math class, they're in foods, and they come back and they're with Jackie for a bit, for example. So think about when you're going to schedule it so that you have their focus and their time. And then determine what you want. So there's a whole bunch of different types. Is it an academic independent student system? Is it a social and communication one? Some of our students do well in academics in class, and they need to come out for the social piece. So what kinds of systems do you want? And then also on that is to make everything reusable. Like save yourself. Like make things that are reusable, plan ahead, use a group so you're not cutting out laminate in the middle of the night at midnight. Have realistic expectations. We have a drive with a whole bunch of resources that we've shared with you guys. I'll ask Mary to share it again, just in case you're like, oh, I don't have that drive, that has tons of resources so you're not having to create this stuff on your own. And a checklist at the end is really important. So a visual schedule for the day and some kind of a visual checklist that lets them know that they've completed it, huge. So they know I've done that task and I'm moving on to the next one. So I just asked Giselle to give me some pictures of some of the systems she's made. So you can see there's one that are drawers for a younger student. Most of our high school, junior high students, they like either file folder system, the binder, or just the files themselves where you just hand them to them. So 1, 2, 3, and here are your files. A lot of, and digital ones, right? Some of them really like the digital ones, which is a Google slide deck that's been made and you go through your tasks in a Google slide. So this is a student in Deer Meadow, I believe, because I'm just thinking I recognize the FM system. So you could see the slides would be, okay, is your FM system on? Have you got your glasses on? Okay, here's the first thing you're going to do. Here's your task. It's on money. So move those around. The next one, complete these patterns. So some of them really like the digital systems because they're a little bit more private, right? It's there and it looks like they're the same as other kids, which I think they really like. It respects their dignity. Visual task analysis, huge. That's your model. So as you're moving through any task, if it's a number task, a communication task, a life skills task, they'll need a step-by-step of chunking that task out so they have it. And then I just wanted a really good note on the IPP. So the IPP are the strategies that the student is going to use to achieve the outcome. But it's not what we give our parents to show them where they're at on the outcome. So you've got a numeracy goal, and Ben is going to use these manipulatives to support number sense. An academic goal in an IPP is not appropriate, which is they're working on recognition of numbers by using flashcards, right? It's like our goal is that he's using manipulatives. In order to achieve number sense, he might use a calculator as part of that. But our academic goals now can be actually in our progress report. Okay, assessment. Couple of things that you need for that. You're still going to need your curriculum and your mapping guide. You need your independence continuum because that's what you're using to determine what you're looking at. And then your rubric is your independence rubric. That's the consistency across the division, is we're all using the same rubric to assess where our children are at on their modified program. And then this little student independence monitoring tool is what I made to help our EAs and our teachers with assessment. So I'm just going to go through that with you. So here's your cautions. Assessment shows growth and independence. And there's got to be a distinction between what the EA does in assessment and what the teacher does. It should be ongoing, of course, and it's based on independence and not on percentages and letter grades like I talked about. And distinguish between accommodations, adaptations, and modifications when you're assessing, which you guys would all know. And then remember that often for our modified kiddos, they're off of a program of studies and grading systems. That's why we've moved into this independence grading system. So here's me walking through the process. So I've got this student, Ben, and here it is. I want him to count up to 31. And you can see right now, I'm just at 20. I'm just trying to see if I can get him to do 20. And then I'll add on to that. So here is what the EA is using. The EA is looking at that and going, okay, like here's the independence level, high levels of support, moderate, limited, or independent. I feel like the EAs are our best shot at knowing this because they're the support. So like I had to help him a ton with that just to get to 10 or like 20, but he's still like, he doesn't quite understand the teens. And then they're like, no, I think he's ready. He can do it independently. Teacher, can you come and have a look at it and assess that? Watch him do up to 20. And then the teacher's like, he's got it, add 5 more. So this is the piece where I think the EAs are super helpful because they can determine the level of support. And then from that, this is what the teacher does, is the teacher writes down the outcome, goes, okay, in September, often they could do that, in October, consistently. So it's almost like a little grade book that you've got where the teacher is just marking down where they're at, and then they'll use this to move forward into their progress report. And we've got that lined out for every one of our outcomes so that you guys don't have to write all of this in. You're just going in as a teacher and going in September, here's what happened. In October, here's where we're at. In November, here's what we've got. So if you look back, here is the monitoring tool, the EA deciding where they're at with it, and then the teacher being able to determine where they're at with their independence. So what I did for this student was next steps, he got up to 20 and I said, okay, then add 10 more and see what happens with that. He wasn't able to do 10 more, so we added 5 and then we added 5 more after that. And the EA monitored that for us. The final piece we have is what I think is most exciting, which is reporting on their growth. So now you've got your curriculum mapping guide that shows what outcomes you're reporting on. And then you've got your skill independence rubric that you just wrote all of that stuff down as a teacher. And now you're just going to fill in your report card. So when you think about those cautions, reporting's got to show growth. It allows us to monitor success. And it provides a really important documentation of the students' programming year after year so that Jackie's got that in her hand when the teacher says, I don't know if this student should be going into the next year. And you're like, yes, this is what we've done so far. Or when the parent says, I need the student to be held back, or I want the student to add another year. You've got now, no, we're on a good track. This is what we've been doing. Remember, at the end of this, this was our goal. So it's so important to me that we have this. And I feel just terrible that we haven't had it before because it makes really complicated and complex and difficult conversations. And a big distinction between a report card and an IPP. Our modified students should have a report card, just like every other student. And yes, they also have an IPP. But I think a lot of us have used the IPP as the report card because we haven't had this system. So now we have it. So that when Ty's coming in, he's got a progress report of where he's at, and he has an IPP that shows the strategies that he's using to achieve that progress. So here is what the progress report looks like. I would love to put this in Power School. That's my next plan, people, is I'd love to be able to open up Power School and you just be able to use consistently, often, like still within, seldom. I would love that. But right now we have this. But what we did for you was make sure we lined up all of the outcomes. So the only thing that you need to do in there is put in your rating of where they're at and then bring that forward. So you might have some that are in progress or completed, and because you're only working on certain goals. So I'm going to just come back and look at your little lovely faces and see if you have any questions. Jeff.
Hi, Marcy. Quick question about the report card and using the indicators. Those are a little bit different than the indicators on the Chinook's Edge report card.
Right, because the Chinook's Edge report card is grades. And this is on a continuum of independence, right? So yeah. It would feel totally awkward if, for example, it was, let's say we were doing functional life skills and we were asking about communication, Jeff. It would feel not good for us to say is limited in communication. What we want to say is still requires support for communication. Okay. So yeah, it's a totally different scale than what you would use for your graded subjects, because these guys are off a program of studies.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Great question, though, Jeff. Yeah. Other questions? Jackie.
Good morning.
Morning, Jackie.
My question is, so if I'm just starting the process, let's say, of assessing all of our kids. So we have 9 kids and I have to start assessing. I don't know that I know the tools to assess every single one of those outcomes to figure out where they're at. That's question 1. Yeah. Question 2 is the progress report you have on the slide right now. Is it then there's one for each part of the curriculum, the numeracy, literacy, functional skills. Is that correct?
Right. And so like Jackie, a couple of things. First of all, maybe in your group, you're going to grab literacy as your academic and functional life skills as your social one. And those are the 2 things that you're working on right now. So in the progress report, you're only looking at literacy and those. So what I would do, because you have a larger group, is rather than go through and map out every single student in all of these areas, which would be totally overwhelming, I would pick certain domains and say that's where we're starting. So I'm starting with numeracy and functional life skills from September until October. And then I'm going to look at communication and literacy from November to December.
And do you feel like that's an add-on to, or a leave those ones that we worked on before?
Hopefully you'll be able to leave them because you'll have built up their independence, and then you're moving on to the next one.
Okay.
Right. But I mean, your goal isn't to get them to be independent at all of those outcomes, because you've got them for 3 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or 4 for some of them. Yeah.
Yeah. And then always, you guys, if you're getting ready to do this map, it is, I think, a little bit of a science. I would have the coordinators come and help you with it.
Okay.
Like Jackie, for sure, I'd have Scott sit down and go, okay, like, let's go through them, and he could ask you the questions, or you could decide together that you've got a set of 5 tasks that you're going to go and bring forward to your kids and say, okay, let's try this. How many of you can move all of these over to 20? And so then you'd be able to go, okay, I can do that. Miles can't do that, right? You can go through and decide, and that will be easier, I think, to have like just common tasks to measure where they're at, rather than you go, I'm not really sure. I don't know if he can count to 20 or not. Like, I've never really asked him, right? Because some of them are just not really there. So I would think I would have a set of tasks and measure where they're at on those tasks.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions? Because this is such a big system moving across, I would really recommend that you have the coordinators help you with it. All of you guys, like, to map out your first kid. So Kylie, if you're like, West Glen, I know you, Kylie, you're like ready to go. Like, have Sharon come out and help you with one, just so you understand the process. And then you're like, okay, I've got it. And even to carve out what it could look like to assess where they're at. So we're here to help you with you guys, so that you've got this. What I'm excited about is that you're spending your time now assessing where the kids are at and working with the kids, and not all of your time making this stuff, right? Making the program and trying to figure out. It's huge. It's a huge amount of work, and I know you've all been doing it. So I have this little slide, probably one of the most important slides I have, which is what's the difference between the progress report and the IPP. Progress report identifies the outcomes and where a student's at on those outcomes. IPP identifies the goals and the strategies that support the outcome. Progress report gives great communication around individual progress and success on those outcomes and independence. IPP gives communication around what goals and strategies the student is using to support that learning and growth with those outcomes. A parent-teacher interview is about the progress report, and IPP is about the goals and the strategies. Our modified kids should have both. If I'm a parent of a modified student, I should be coming in for a parent-teacher interview, talking about the progress of my kid on this outcomes and curriculum. And then I also have an IPP meeting where you're talking about the goals and the strategies to make sure that my child is successful with that curriculum. And then I'm just going to quickly say, because Sharon is doing this presentation, these pathway plans are so important, right? It is us mapping out from grade 8 going into grade 9, the transition plan to adulthood. So we work together as a team to scaffold this process out. So by grade 12, we've got all of our T's crossed and our I's dotted, and everybody is on the same page and knows where we're headed with regards to adulthood. And the big reason isn't because I don't want our kids to be in a grade 13 year. It's because I've watched over the years our kids actually not having any other program. So like Jackie's a great example. Jackie runs an amazing program. And so the program at the end of grade 12, she's like, we're good. I've taught you what you need to move out into adulthood. And then it's like, nope, I want them back in for another year. And she's like, I don't have any more programming, right? It's kind of like you feel like you're in the same, like almost Groundhog's Day, and you're doing the same thing over and over again when you really want them to move forward into adulthood and start to develop those skills. The other thing that I think is key is we actually then are withholding our kids from accessing those adult services, which they need, right? And we're just prolonging that. And I don't want that either. But we have to be able to have everybody ready. So everybody's got to be on the same page. Everybody's got to get everything organized, including our external partners. So PDD, AISH, guardianship, all of those things. Those all need to be together and wrapped up with a lovely bow. So by the time they're in grade 12, it's like, yes, that's right, because we've been following this pathway for the past 4 years, and we all know where we're at. Our problem right now is we don't have a clear document like that. And so when we get to grade 12, our families panic. And I understand why they panic. They panic because now they're not sure what the plan is for their child when they leave high school. And they trust us and would prefer to have their kids with us, right? So, I mean, it's a double-edged sword. It's a huge compliment to us that our parents want their kids to stay with us longer. But we have to be able to be the, I think, wiser partner and prepare our parents for their kids to go into adulthood. So that's huge. Okay, are there any questions? Got some time. That's a lot of stuff. So I would love to hear your questions, your thoughts as we move forward. Amy, is that all clear as mud, or how you feeling about that?
I don't actually do any of this at our school, so no, it's not super clear, but I'll go talk to them and see if they have questions. I'm just here for notes.
Right? So it's a good comment. So imagine I'm a high school teacher in Sundre. So I'm an English high school teacher in Sundre. And I've got one student who's on a modified program in my English class. So how am I going to do that? Like, where am I going to start? If I'm reading To Kill a Mockingbird in grade 10, and this student is working at a grade 4 level of literacy. So how do I manage that? It isn't that we want all of these students to go into another room. So Amy might go, okay, now I know what I can do. I can look at this curriculum. I can see where they're at in literacy, and I can make a work system for them for literacy and support those skills while they're in my English class. Okay, Dawn, you're good? 2 thumbs up. Okay, well I hope you guys all have access to the drive and you have everything you need. As I said, please reach out to our team when you start the process. I hope you're excited for the process. It's a lot of work, but I mean, you guys have been doing so much work on the side that I'm hoping this will streamline things for you and help you and make it so that you're not making individual programs for the rest of your life. My gosh, 300 programs I made, Jackie, 300. That's 300 programs. That's insane. They were all different. I didn't even copy any of them. It was nuts. Okay, well, thank you guys. I'm going to give you some time for a break, and I'll probably see you sometime throughout the day. Thank you again for everything you do. Take care.